Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome to Monday on Honestly Provocative Talk Radio for America. Glad to have you on board. We got to talk about the testimony of Hunter Biden's business partner, I guess I should say former business partner, since Devon Archer at some point in the near future is going to be heading off to prison. Although the Joe Biden Department of Justice apparently is trying to rush that head off to prison because they think apparently that they might be able to stop his testimony, some of which he gave today. And what he's put in that testimony is going to be, I think, absolutely devastating to Joe Biden. And why? Because Joe Biden has always denied that he had anything to do with his son's business deals overseas, deals that actually made millions of dollars for the Biden crime family, and at least allegedly a $5 million bribe for Joe Biden himself. And that was part of what Devon Archer testified to today. But let me get into the details in a moment. First, if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And by the way, our Twitter poll today: should illegal aliens be allowed to become police officers in the great state of Illinois? I know, Lincoln's home state. The governor there, J.B. Pritzker, has signed a brand new law into effect that allows foreign nationals, including so-called dreamers. Those are illegal aliens, whether, Barack Obama signed his name to a piece of paper or not. DACA was not legal. DACA does not straighten out your illegal alien status. It does allow you to stay in the United States. But now J.B. Pritzker says they want to make them into police officers. Now, I would ask you this. Does it make any sense that if you want to have a job enforcing the law, that you can be somebody who is currently breaking the law? Because illegal aliens are currently breaking America's law. And if you say to me, but Lars, remember DACA, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, signed by President Obama. Yeah, signed illegally. Even Obama, a year before he signed it, said, I don't have the legal authority to do this. And then he went ahead and did it anyway. So you have an illegal alien who's in America illegally, who is benefiting from a law illegally signed by Barack Obama. And now the governor of Illinois says, and why don't we just make them all cops? If that makes any sense to any of you, I'd be glad to take the naysayer call at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and vote in our Twitter poll. You'll find it two places, at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group years and years ago. You can join now at amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you and better for America. Now, coming up this hour, does the deliberate slow walking of the tax fraud case against Hunter Biden highlight a broader issue within America's Justice Department? And is there real justice for Americans under the Biden DOJ? Should banks have the right to debank you without any reason whatsoever simply because they disagree with your views? We're going to jump into that as well. Why is the Biden regime refusing to provide a Secret Service protection to candidate RFK Jr.? And then take just a moment to cast a vote in my Twitter poll. Now, about Devon Archer's testimony. I think the most significant thing in that testimony is that Hunter Biden understood he had nothing much to recommend him. He had been booted out of the Navy Reserve and then almost immediately got that job on the Burisma Natural Gas Company Board of Directors at $1 million a year, which would be extraordinary even in the United States. Here's Hunter Biden in a country where he doesn't speak the language, on the board of directors of a company in which he has no particular expertise in natural gas or energy or anything else. But what Devon Archer told the House Oversight Committee today in some transcribed testimony is that the company wanted to add Hunter to its board because of the Biden brand, as his dad was the point man for Ukraine on behalf of Barack Obama back when Joe was working as the number two. Archer, according to the New York Post, says the Burisma owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, allegedly told an FBI informant he was coerced into paying $10 million in bribes to Hunter and then Vice President Joe Biden. So Joe Biden, as I've said many, many times, is bought and paid for by all these foreign countries. And does it seem strange then that Joe Biden, understanding there are people in Ukraine who can out him, is now one of the biggest proponents of sending tens of billions of dollars into a notoriously corrupt country for a war that never would have had to happen if Joe Biden has actually been doing his job. Joe Biden practically invited the Russians to invade. Remember back when he said just last year, he was asked by a reporter, well, what happens if the Russians invade? This was right before the invasion. And this was a comment he made in February. He said, well, if it's just a small invasion, no big deal. Well, I got to tell you something. It is a big deal. It's now tens of billions of dollars. Archer also testified that Hunter Biden put his father on a speakerphone more than 20 times during business meetings to promote the brand, the Biden brand, including at a Paris dinner with reps from a French energy company and while in China with Jonathan Lee of BHR. That's Bohai Harvest Resource Partners, a China-backed investment fund co-founded by Hunter Biden in 2013 after he introduced his father to Jonathan Lee in Beijing during an official trip. Does it sound like the fix was in? Does it sound like Hunter Biden was selling his dad's influence for big bucks overseas? And now Joe Biden realizes he's compromised. And that's why he's had to lie for all these years, saying, I never once talked to my son, never discussed business with him, never met with his business partners. Well, all those lies are now coming apart. To your calls now. Let's go first to Phil. Hey, Phil, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Oh, lots of things. Frustrated by the government, of course.
Of course. Me too.
But these people that call in, and, the naysayers particularly, they bring up a comment or question, and you try to explain it to them, and they keep interrupting you.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. It's a waste of your time, really, the way I see it.
Well,
I think you have more patience than anybody.
Thank you.
You could cut them off.
I could, but do you know what I think it illustrates, Phil? If I ask somebody to explain something that doesn't seem very explainable to me, and they start into their explanation, I would just let them go. Because usually somebody without a good set of facts or logic on their side is their own worst enemy. When they try to explain. So if a person asks me a question, I start to answer, and they don't want to hear that answer because they realize it's going to blow their argument right out of the water. Then they interrupt because they say, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Well, then say that. You say, I have my beliefs. I'm not going to be dissuaded by facts or logic or the law or anything else. And but they don't do that. They think, I guess, you can win the argument by simply interrupting somebody often enough. And so I don't mind. I think it illustrates the folly of the arguments they're trying to make. And Phil, thanks very much for noticing. Glad to be with you on a Monday. Always glad to get your calls. 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And what about major banks debanking people like you and me because of our political or social views? Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, as far as I can tell, my credit card, my debit card still operate as they're supposed to, although I suppose almost any day now I could get debanked like people are. Having their banks say, hey, we don't want your business anymore because we don't like your politics. We may not like your religious views. And how is that any of the bank's business at all? I thought we'd talk about that with Tracy Beans, who's been covering it as editor of Uncover DC. Tracy, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Lars, thanks for having me back. Yeah, we just published a column by Wendy Mahoney at Uncover DC about this because there's been a spate of debankings in the past week or so. Dr. Joseph Mercola and all of his staff, including their families, which is just absolutely abhorrent. And also Nigel Farage was debanked as well. And,
I like him.
He's great. I've been debanked too. And General Flynn and many, many, many others. And it really is, it brings up the conversation, you can't be canceled from your phone company, right, Lars, if
Yep.
people don't like what you say. They can't just drop you, or your electric company. When is it time to start thinking about banks as not private institutions, but as utilities?
Well, and aren't they utilities to a large degree because they are different than, say, a retail store? I mean, if I walked into a retail store and they knew my politics, said, we really don't have any interest in you. I'd say, well, I think that's kind of a foolish point of view. Why don't you just sell me what it is you sell if I'm interested in buying and forget about politics? That's what a smart retailer would do. But a retail store could get away with that. When it comes to a bank, banks are hugely regulated by the federal government and the state government. And to a large extent, they are utilities in the sense that anyone who is not legally, and I don't know if there is a way of being legally precluded from having a bank account, but if you're not legally precluded, doesn't a bank have to serve you under the laws?
I don't know what the laws are specifically because we've never really dealt with something like this before in our history. And what it really does is open up the door for the central bank digital currency and what will be coming down the pike should this be implemented. Basically, a social credit score where they can decide if they don't like what you believe, they can stop you from transacting and doing business in whatever place they decide. I mean, I know for me, when I was banned from PayPal and Venmo and all of those other payment processors, it was really hard for me because people wanted to send their monthly donation to keep us running, and they couldn't do it because we couldn't use PayPal, and a lot of people use PayPal. I can't bank securely if I want to buy something using PayPal anymore because of my political views. So it's really a terrible thing. And what they did to Dr. Mercola is really terrible. They didn't just ban him. Chase Bank actually banned him and his entire staff and their family members. So it trickled down to people that weren't even directly involved with whatever tickled them and bothered them that Mercola said, even though I don't agree that they should ban him. But one of the employees is supporting her husband who's in the Philippines in the hospital, and that account is doing the auto transactions for all of it. And now she's got to take all her money out of the bank, put it in another bank for no reason. They give no reason whatsoever. And it's Chase Bank, Lars. It's not like it's a little credit union, which would never do something like this. And we've seen what's happened with the banking industry over the past year. And I just think this is another icing on top of the cake, another layer that everybody needs to be worried about, because right now it's just people that are, I guess more well known. But who knows when the everyman is going to start having to deal with this, which probably will be very soon if it keeps up.
Well, it's funny because, Tracy, at least a decade ago, I got a gentleman reach out to me and said, look, I'm in the firearms business. And I said, okay. And he runs a store. And he said, the bank said they're closing our accounts. And I said, well, be honest with me. Have you done anything? He says, Lars, I got 800 credit score. We've never gone south on a loan. We've always made all our payments. There are no structural reasons to debank him. And I said, what did the bank tell you? This is during the throttling that went on, where the attorney general and others were saying, let's throttle these businesses down. And this is frightening because it means the banks who fear the federal regulators and to some extent the state regulators can say, look, we want to steer clear of anybody that's going to cause problems for us because all we need is a regulator to come in and say, hey, we're going to have to put you through 2 or 3 more audits this year. Well, why is that? Well, you have all these people banking for you. What I wish, Tracy, because I'm a big believer in the marketplace, I wish a conservative billionaire, probably not the Koch brothers, but somebody else who's got a pile of money to go out and buy a bank and then start advertising themselves as we are the freedom bank. We're the bank where we don't care what your politics are. As long as you're in a legal business, we don't care if you're in firearms or tobacco or, you're pushing one point of view or another, left or right, we will take your business. And I would think that the first bank that did that would probably get a huge influx of business from people saying, I've been waiting for this. I'm fearful that I could be debanked. I want to go with somebody that makes an absolute, rock solid guarantee they will bank with me no matter what my politics are.
I agree with you. It would be a boon, and that's the free market at work. It's beautiful. And, it's not only just banking, Lars, too. You think about when the Canadian truckers went on their, movement, and they went after GoFundMe, stopped them, the payment processors, the credit card companies. The Canadian government said we're going to seize the bank accounts of anybody that donated to them. That was really terrible. It didn't work out the way they wanted. They had to reverse course only because it caused a bank run, Lars, because people went to the bank and said, I need to take my money out. The government could seize my money at any point because of my political beliefs. And it caused a bank run in Canada. And then they were like, oh, goodness, because I don't know how many people know this, but there is never enough money in the banks to be able to cover all of the deposits that the United States has.
No,
it would
because
be a nightmare.
they do fractional reserve banking, and I've gotten into lots of arguments with people about reserve banking. But I said, hey, you deposit $1,000 in your bank. Do you expect the bank to put it to work, or just have it sit there as ones and zeros in an account? They say, put it to work. Pay me some interest. And you say, okay, they can only put it to work if they loan out most of what you've deposited, and then that gets loaned out to somebody else who redeposits it somewhere else, and it gets loaned out again. It's fractional reserve banking, if I understand the concept right. But this it strikes me as something that ought to be illegal, especially if it starts to get in not just personal views, but maybe even religious views. Because could you imagine a bank saying, oh, you're Muslim, we don't want any business with Muslims? Well, that would, there'd be a stink about that in today's politically correct times. But if you said, oh, you're a right-wing Christian, we really don't want your business, you have too many other associations, that stuff is dangerous. And it almost, I don't hate to say it, Tracy, I'm going to say it, it has a biblical ring to it. The point where if you don't have the mark of the beast, which doesn't mean 666, it means what's in your head and in your heart. If you don't go along with the conventional wisdom right now, you will be unable to transact business, buy or sell things, work for wages or anything else. And you say, wow, that was written 2,000 years ago. Yeah, and kind of relevant, more than a little bit relevant today.
Ed, you make a great point there. And what people should consider, too, is start transacting more in cash. Everything is digital, electronic, on your phone. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I pay for things with my phone all the time. Start carrying cash on you. Bring cash back into circulation, because the less people use it because of the convenience, the more easy it'll be, the easier it'll be for them to try and move us completely into a cashless society, which will be the death knell and will make things like this even more difficult for people. And I really do believe, Lars, Congress needs to get involved here, and there needs to be some kind of regulation against being able to deplatform or debank people who have differing perspectives, as long as they're contracting legal business.
I agree with you. And the last thing I want to see, and what started last month was, or this month, July, was this the Fed Now nonsense about a central bank digital currency, and that's how they're going to move to it. It'll move slowly at first, and they'll say, well, this is going to be more convenient. You're going to have a central bank digital currency. Tell you what, if they can turn off your money, if they can turn off your car, if you're dumb enough to buy one of the electrics, then at some point you won't be able to do anything unless you kowtow, as the Chinese have to kowtow to the Politburo in Beijing. There may be people in the Biden administration or others who say, well, you better go along with the program, Lars. You're going to find yourself in an immobile car. I drive a nice internal combustion engine car, and you'll find yourself with no money. And that means you'll find yourself with no food. You can find her story, and the stories written by the people under her. Tracy Beans is the editor of Uncover DC, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I want to get some of your phone calls and emails. We love that. And in fact, we especially love naysayers, people who disagree with me. And I don't often get the abundance of riches of having two on the line, so I have to pick one at random. Let's go to Chris. Hey, Chris, welcome to the program. You told the producers you're a naysayer, and we always put naysayers first. What do you and I disagree about today?
Kind of a naysayer.
Okay.
First off, I want to say hi to Winston, your dog.
Oh, my studio dog, my studio burn. It's going to be his third birthday is Saturday. He's doing
right?
great.
Oh. We have a Great Dane Rottweiler that just turned 2 yesterday. Anyway, so not much of a naysayer, but I like to protect children, and so the whole DACA thing with Obama and all that, but it's about the children, right? I mean,
they're not kids.
So
they're not kids. They were kids. They were kids, like all of us were kids when they came here. But hold on.
I get that.
When you were a kid and you got away with things, and maybe you were allowed to do things, and there was no permanent record for you because, well, you're a kid. But now you're an adult. All of these DACAs are adults. Some of them are in their 30s. And you say, okay, but we still want them treated as children. Does that make sense?
I know, but no, it absolutely does. But if if your parents bring you across the borders, and then you're stuck here, then aren't you? I mean, that was
you're not stuck
20,
here,
30
though,
years
Chris.
Ago.
Chris, you are not stuck here, and that's one I'll push back on hard. And let me tell you why. say
Okay.
a kid is brought here when he's 6 years old, all right, and he's a DACA. So then 10 years later, he gets DACA status, but he's 18 years old now. What does he have? He has a no-cost to him public education that would be worth big bucks in most of the countries that the illegal aliens come from, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, etc.
Sure.
He probably is bilingual. He's almost certainly bilingual in most of those households. So if you said, well, what are his options? Well, he could legally return to his country, and you say, well, then he'll be screwed. And you say, no, he'll go back there with a 12th grade education, bilingual, and let's assume he or she is reasonably well spoken. Is that person going to do reasonably well in a country like Guatemala, Honduras, et cetera? And then they can apply to come back into the United States and say, I was there.
Well, and that's the right way to do things. I agree that. I mean, I totally agree with that. Yeah. So.
Okay, what happens when you tell him you get a free pass in and all the other people that stood in line to get the ability to become an American citizen had to stand in line oftentimes for 5 or 6 years, and they were all chumps. They should have done it illegally like your parents did, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I've been carpenters. I'm a carpenter, and I worked with tons of Hispanic people that have gone it the right way, and then have not gone it the right way. And
let me ask you something. Are you a journeyman? Are you a journeyman?
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm 42. Yeah. So
no, but you're a journeyman carpenter,
union.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you something? Let's say somebody found a way to fake their way in as a journeyman. They lied. And they said, I'm a journeyman. And they got in and they faked up the paperwork. And then a few years in, they're discovered, you're not really a journeyman. You didn't have to have the same training we did. You didn't have to jump through the same hoops we did. And the guy says to you, but I've been here for a few years. Now you have to let me stay as a journeyman, even though I cheated my way in. Would you say yes to that?
No. Oh, of course not. No.
Yeah.
And I was a journeyman long before I even joined the union, which is technically a union term, and everybody gets paid the same. Which I know you're not a big union guy, but everybody gets paid the same.
Explain to me why you should get the same wage as somebody who's either worse than you or better than you at your job.
I have no answer. Yeah, because I'm better than pretty much everybody, and that sounds conceited, but I mean, honestly, I've been doing this stuff for like 23 years now, and started when I was 16, and everybody else they put 8 years, maybe.
So you wouldn't take kindly to somebody lying on his or her resume, would you?
Oh, of course not. No. Even though I've been
but in this case, the DACA kids are lying on their resume. They say, I know I'm here illegally, but I want you to treat me as though I'm legal.
It makes sense, man. It does. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want them to be cops?
I don't know, but
I do.
I don't know.
I would say somebody who's
really
breaking the law currently should not be allowed to be a law enforcement person. How's the logic on that?
Yeah, that's pretty logical. So.
I try what I can. Chris, thanks very much. You're a good naysayer. Let's go to Matt, who's another naysayer. Matt, what do we disagree about?
Hey, Lars. First off, last time I called, it was the first time I was on the radio, and I got a little excited. So I'd like to apologize for that.
No worries. What's on your mind today, and what do we disagree about?
I don't agree with you a lot socially, but I would give you my money if you ran a bank in a second. I'll tell you that right now.
I'm not that good at math, but what do we not agree on?
Well, Hunter Biden. So let's take all the facts, not allegations.
Sure.
And let's roll with me for a second. Net worth, if there's 50 sources, we can maybe call that a fact. He's very rich.
Yep.
The Trump kids are very rich. They have similar educations. I'm sure they've skated the laws in similar ways.
You are? Hold on. I thought we were going to stick to facts, Matt. When you say they've probably broken the law.
Whoa. I said I think.
Okay. You think? What would lead you to believe that Don Jr. and Eric have broken the law?
How do you get to that? Okay, Lars, it doesn't matter.
I can tell you how you get to it. You have a dad
who
did it.
No.
Well,
Stop.
All right.
It doesn't matter how I got there. Let's say they have both skirted the law in the same amount.
I don't think they have. I don't think there's any evidence they have.
Maybe they're both so innocent. I don't think either of them will ever.
Matt,
see anything.
when people call me and say so and so is a pervert or a child molester, I say, how do you know that? And they say, well, he was convicted of being a pervert. I'd say, well, that's pretty good. I'll go with that. Every time I ask you, well, what would lead you to believe that Donald Trump's sons?
Well, okay, Lars, I made a mistake. Well, let me rephrase that.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
No,
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
There's a level of individual that will never be prosecuted, and both those people are in that level.
But saying somebody who's never committed a crime will never be prosecuted is pretty easy to prove. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?
I'm not here to defend Hunter Biden, right?
Well, I would just ask you this. He was getting paid, we know for a fact, I'm sticking with facts, $1 million a year. Now, if you get paid $1 million a year, you must be, what's
shady.
That? Huh?
That's shady.
Oh, no, hold on. There are legitimate ways to make, if you're a movie actor and you put a lot of butts in seats at theaters, $1 million a year may be small potatoes. But
not Hunter Biden.
If he's, no, but hold on. If he's making $1 million a year, they're buying something.
That money?
No, but hold on.
Yeah,
I don't care what he did with the money. I'm asking you, what was he getting paid? What was he getting paid for?
Well, Lars, we're asking the same question. I don't know what he's worth.
Oh, I know. No, hold on. I didn't ask what his net worth was. He was getting $1 million a year. You just keep interrupting, Matt. Well, some people are. A really good surgeon is worth $1 million a year. Okay,
and Hunter Biden
I would agree with that because they provide. Okay, Matt, I can't continue that, but I appreciate the call. Let's go to Paul in Alabama. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind, sir?
I was just thinking about the digital currency. I mean, they're already pretty much going to it, and you're talking about China, how the people's got to actually go to the government and do this and do that. I mean, they just implemented a point system for all their citizens to where if you do good
social
deeds,
credit score. You're right.
Yep.
And I think it's coming to America sooner rather than later. Coming up next, a little more on Hunter Biden. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Monday. It's my pleasure to be with you. It's the honestly provocative talk radio for America, and your calls are welcome at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com, and join me in welcoming Cully Stimson, Senior Legal Fellow at Heritage, Manager of the National Security Law Program, and co-author with Zach Smith in the new book, Rogue Prosecutors, How Radical Soros Lawyers Are Destroying America's Communities. Cully, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Lars.
Should Americans be very upset, even angry, that they see that there are parts of our so-called justice system that appear to be working at cross purposes with the rest of the system?
Well, if they're not angry, they should be gravely concerned because it's obvious now that there's a two-tier or two-sided justice system, one for Democrats and one for Republicans, and that's unacceptable.
I would agree with you on that. How do we get that fixed? Because it's the kind of thing that I guess most of us would say, well, it has to be equal. It has to be a nation of laws, not a nation of men, as John Adams used to like to talk about. How do we get back to that when you have whole agencies that are willing to do this? As the Washington Times reported last week, IRS Special Agent Gary Shapley and IRS criminal investigator Joseph Ziegler testified in detail how Justice Department lawyers and FBI officials hindered their investigation of Hunter Biden's financial dealings. And what is it exactly that Hunter Biden has on these guys that makes certain parts of our government stand up and defend Hunter Biden? I mean, does he have pictures of him with farm animals or what?
Yeah, I don't think Hunter has much except a drug problem and a shakedown habit. And Hans von Spakovsky and I, my colleague at Heritage, wrote a long piece in the Washington Times last week, which was cross-posted on the Daily Signal, sort of explaining why Shapley and Ziegler, obviously Democrats, Ziegler tells you he's a gay Democrat, and he said he was risking his career, his reputation, and his casework by coming forward and using the proper channels as a whistleblower. But it's very clear that they had the goods on Hunter. It's very clear that Leslie Wolf, an assistant U.S. attorney, and others in the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office slow-walked the investigation, stopped these two highly decorated investigators from following the leads and following the facts where they may prevented them from executing search warrants at the Biden family compound where Hunter had refused to let him look at a storage unit, tipped off the defense counsel that they were going to execute a search warrant at Hunter's storage unit. Let the tolling agreement, in other words, stopping the statute of limitations from expiring, let the tolling agreement expire so they could intentionally not be able to prosecute Hunter for tax years in which he earned several $1 million from who knows where. And so, I mean, if this was Eric Trump, if this was one of the Trump family members or a Bush or a Reagan family member, do you think that the Justice Department would treat them with kid gloves like this? Of course not. So something's rotten in Denmark, and this plea deal that fell apart, I think, is just the beginning of unrolling and finding out what the hell is actually going on.
I guess, Cully, maybe it comes from the fact that I labor under the disability that I've never worked in the government. I've worked in the private sector. And I guess ordinarily if I was trying to do my job and somebody else was getting in the way of that, I either go to my boss and say, hey, this guy is getting in the way of me doing what you want me to do. Or if my boss won't fix it, I go to that person's boss. And if necessary, I jump a couple of chains of command or a couple of levels and go to the boss of boss and say, hey, I've been told to do this. This person is deliberately stopping me from doing my job. Do you want it to be that way? If so, tell me, and then I can make decisions about whether I want to work here or not.
Yeah, and you would have been a great federal or state government employee because you would have followed through with those values. And for the most part, most federal and state government employees follow, the Lars Larson mantra that you do the right thing all the time and you use the chain of command to fix problems. But as Steve Bradbury, my colleague at Heritage, wrote in a major paper of why the FBI and the DOJ especially, but mainly the FBI, needs to be reformed from the ground up, he lists just a litany of abuses by senior government officials at the FBI, which shows that these people are rotten to the core, and the only way you can fix it is structural reform, which, if you think back to the founding of our country, Lars, I mean, the reason that we have separation of powers laid out not only horizontally and vertically the way we do is because the founders understood the human condition. They understood human nature, and they understood that only by separating the powers to the extent they could would it curb the ability of the government and bad actors in the government to abuse individual liberty. And that's why we have the separation of powers, and that's why the FBI needs to be reformed from the ground up.
Well, but does this suggest that every layer of these government agencies, FBI, DOJ, whatever, is so corrupt that when they see things happening below them, they say, that's all right. It's to benefit the cause, and we're going to go along with it. And that really suggests that the idea that was radical at one point to say we need to just completely dismantle the FBI and, if necessary, build a new one, a brand new one from the ground up with new rules, because we can't fix the old one. It's too corrupt from the inside.
Well, DOJ contains, of course, 93 U.S. attorneys' offices. You're quite familiar with the one there in Portland.
Yeah.
And for the most part, you have solid, patriotic Americans who are assisting U.S. attorneys and investigators in those offices. We're not talking about that. We're talking about parts of the FBI that have been weaponized by bad actors and abused their authority over years over a variety of highly politicized cases, not the least of which is the Russian hoax concocted by the Clinton campaign against Trump and perpetrated across years and, of course, exacerbated by a fawning media who is more than willing to go along with it. And so I would recommend Steve Bradbury's paper for everybody because there's just too many cases where the FBI has ratcheted up their awesome authorities and weaponized it against Republicans, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah, it is unacceptable. I really, I wish I saw a different way to do this, but I mean, I'm not that anxious to save the FBI anymore. I kind of wish the whole agency was simply taken apart, and maybe the DOJ at the same time, or some new rules written by Congress, but getting Congress to do anything almost seems impossible these days. Cully, thanks very much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Cully Stimson, Senior Legal Fellow at Heritage, Manager of the Security Law Firm Law Program, and co-author with Zach Smith of the book called Rogue Prosecutors, How Radical Soros Lawyers Are Destroying America's Communities. Glad to get your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I have to tell you something. School security seems like it ought to be one of the most important things in America. And yet when it comes to preventing terrible incidents from happening, the public schools are not getting it done, but private institutions are. And I've got an example from just a little while ago today. And my friend Todd Starnes from KWAM, one of our great affiliates, is on the phone with me right now from Memphis. Todd, what happened at the Hebrew Academy?
Hi, Lars. Well, this happened just after lunchtime here in Memphis at the Margolin Hebrew Academy when a man tried to walk into the building armed with a handgun, and Memphis police say he was intent on shooting people. It turns out that this particular academy has a fierce security system, and the school actually has double security doors. So this guy was not able to gain entry. But what the man didn't understand is when he did walk through that first set of doors, he was automatically photographed on the video surveillance. And so the guy goes outside, he's angry, he fires the gun 4 or 5 times and takes off. But Lars, thanks to the school's security system, they were able to give police a photograph of the suspect and also a description of the getaway truck. And about 30 or so minutes later, they were able to stop this guy. He tried to get out of the vehicle armed with that gun, and a Memphis police officer took the guy down. He's in critical condition right now at the hospital.
Well, I got to tell you something, Todd, just so people understand, because I go armed most places away from my house as well. So armed is not a bad thing. This man walked in through the first door. I've seen the picture that you posted. This is Todd Starnes from KWAM, one of our great affiliate stations. He owns the station. He's on the station. The man had the gun out and holding it by his leg. So this wasn't just somebody carrying a pistol on his hip in a holster. This was a guy who was already ready to shoot.
That's right. He was ready to hurt somebody today. Now, Congressman Steve Cohen, who is our Democrat representative, was right out of the gate accusing this guy and really accusing this of being a case of anti-Semitism and white supremacy. But KWAM has learned from our sources that the suspect is actually a Jewish man who attended the academy. We are not releasing his name, but we know who this individual is. And but this does not appear to be a case of anti-Semitism. This individual is believed to have some sort of mental illness. By the way, Congressman Cohen is coming out. He's not retracting, but he's reporting the same information we are right now.
Okay, and it's wrong to jump to conclusions. I tell my audience all the time, well, I got to wait until I see what facts are coming in, and then I may be able to bridge, leverage a little bit beyond the facts saying with A, B, and C, we can add up to D, but you don't jump out and say it's automatically anti-Semitism. So do we have any idea what the guy's beef with the school is, other than the fact that maybe he's mental?
We do not. The family has a very sad history, and we don't want to give out too much information right now. We're trying to verify a lot of that. But it just appears that this was a very angry individual. We've been able to look at the man's Facebook page. He was making some postings just a few hours before the shooting, but nothing that would indicate that he was going out to shoot someone. But I have to tell you, Lars, this really terrified a city that is already just under the gun with crime, the deadliest city in America. schools were placed on precautionary lockdown across the area as the Memphis police went out and hunted this guy down. And God bless the Memphis police. They were able to stop this guy. And as the police chief said earlier, her officers mitigated what could have been a potential mass shooting situation today.
Well, let me ask you something else, because I'm guessing Margolin Hebrew Academy is probably not a gigantic school. Like many public schools are huge institutions, up to 3,000 and 4,000 students. How big is it? Because if a little school like this, and I'm guessing it's little, just based, and again, I'm speculating a little bit, but most private schools, especially religious schools, are relatively small. If they can stop it with the kind of technology they've got, the big schools ought to be able to do it and then some.
It's a great point, Lars. And Memphis is an interesting city. We have one of the largest Jewish populations in the nation here. So the school not very large, but we have lots of Jewish schools and organizations here in the Mid-South, and all of them take security very, very seriously. As do many. We have a very large parochial school system as well, and everybody takes school security seriously here, especially in light of just how dangerous our city is right now under the rule of these progressive anti-cop Democrats.
And wouldn't it be nice if the big schools said, hey, we should do lessons learned like the military does, like police do, and say, how did they manage to stop it there? Let's see if we can copy that same thing at our big public schools, if they had any sense. Now, I'm hoping your local public schools would say, whatever they did right there, we ought to copy all that. The double security doors, the camera, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a parent was telling one of our local TV stations, WREG, that security at both the school and across the Jewish community is very, very tight. It's very well coordinated, and they actually have a security committee that meets at the school. Our broadcast center is in a Jewish neighborhood, and it is, like I said, it is very tight-knit, close-knit community, and they take security seriously. So I think there is something that we can learn here from how they averted what could have been a disaster today.
Todd, I really appreciate you jumping on so quickly with us about an incident that only happened a few hours ago. Todd, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lars.
You betcha. That's Todd Starnes, the owner and one of the powerhouses there in Memphis. He's on our affiliate station, KWAM. But averting a mass shooting like that, learn the lessons from it, apply them somewhere else. In any case, I wanted to get to that quickly because it happened so recently. In the meantime, would you like to join the best conversation in talk journalism? It's right here at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And vote in our Twitter poll if you care to. It doesn't cost anything. Kind of habit forming after a while. Should DACA illegal aliens be allowed to become police officers? Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has just signed a law into place so that people who are illegally in the country but are covered under that illegal order from Barack Obama, the DACA, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, can now become law enforcement officers in Illinois, even though they are breaking the law by being in the country to begin with, because their status did not change legally just because Barack Hussein Obama signed his name to a piece of paper. And then we had the testimony about Devon Archer, the former business partner of Hunter Biden, who testified in a transcribed interview with the House Oversight Committee, testified that President Biden lied to the American public, said to America dozens of times, I've never talked to business with my son. No, his son was selling the brand, the family brand of Biden, and selling influence when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. And at least according to one FBI whistleblower, the Biden family got about $10 million in bribes. If they don't start the impeachment hearings soon, then the Republicans have no backbone at all. Glad to be with you on a Monday. Always glad to get your calls at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And coming up, lack of police funding, a contributor to the rise in crime in America. We'll get to that in your calls up next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on a Monday. Always glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. A lot of American cities run by liberal Democrats for the most part, the blue cities, they decided to do the defund the police thing, although it seemed like nonsense to me at the time. In fact, there was a point where Dr. Curry Myers knows that I actually didn't even believe nobody's going to listen to these knuckleheads marching out in the streets and rioting and looting and all that when they say defund the police, and yet and still they did it. And now they're starting to feel the impact of that or the effect of all that. Dr. Curry Myers is a criminologist, former sheriff, and a state trooper. Dr. Myers, welcome back.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. That defund movement didn't go very well, did it?
Well, I guess it depends on your point of view. For the people demanding defunding, they seem to get exactly what they wanted. Although I thought the very fact that they were a mob in the streets I don't listen to mobs. I listen to sensible people, and yet there were all these city councils, county commissions, state legislatures that did listen to it, and now the chickens are coming home to roost, aren't they?
Yeah, it's exactly right, and it's unfortunate, but we've been forced really to change our entire criminal justice public policy system based on 5% of the population that's been able to convince others. I think in many ways they don't want to fight the old term of racism that sometimes occurs and gets thrown at people. So we have a tendency to cave in as a result, and a lot of those demonstrations were about that, and police officers didn't know what to do, didn't know how to go forward with it. And we had a lot of elected officials just said, okay, if that's what the consensus is, but it wasn't the consensus for Americans. It was the consensus of a small percentage of people that just yelled the loudest. And now we have these unintended consequences going on. So in Oakland in particular, we've had the NAACP has blasted city leaders now for saying this is a crisis. And they specifically said it's failed leadership at the elected level, including the defund the police movement, the district attorney's unwillingness to charge and prosecute people who murder and commit life-threatening serious crimes. We've talked about this many times with woke prosecutors that are not following state law, and the proliferation of anti-police rhetoric that has occurred. And Oakland is reeling. And now and the rest of the country is reeling too. About 1% of Democrat counties, 1% of Democrat counties in the United States of America makes up about 42% of America's murders.
It suggests that if you put some attention to that and actually started punishing criminals, you could get a change. So if they're having the chickens come home to roost, if they're seeing the bad effects of these bad policies, do you think we've now seen the worm turn to where they're going to say, okay, then we need to reverse those crazy policies? Or will they do that?
I don't think everybody's still turning. I think this is helpful. It's one chapter, and the NAACP can have can help this tremendously by coming forward like they did. But we have to have more chapters be willing to come forward. That's number one. Number two, the real concern that I have in the long term is that if you change things back to the way they were immediately, you just can't refund the police. You just can't restaff the police automatically. This is going to be something that's going to haunt us for the next couple years, maybe even another decade, because you have to hire people. You have to have, we've had early retirements. We've had seasoned police officers leave without qualifying for retirement. I'm talking about officers that have 10, 15 years on the job that have said, I'm done, I've had enough. So we have retention issues. The lack of leadership that occurs when you have that void as a result could last for decades. When you have seasoned police officers that would be leaders in the field and at some point police executives someday that are leaving the profession in droves. So let's say we stop it tomorrow and everybody says we made a mistake. This is going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. And still, you have to deal with it. It's not about having another committee to sit down and study this issue and talk about this issue. We actually have to have problem solving using evidence-based policing to use our resources and our labor resources and our equipment resources to go after those that are recidivists, because we know that most violent crime recidivists, if they get out of prison, it's about a 70% recidivism rate. For those under 25, it skyrockets to 80%. So we have to be able to take the time to use data evidence policing, go after the people that are committing these crimes. Probably every officer on the beat knows who the vast majority of violent criminals are in their area. and they're just not able to act because when they do arrest them for something, prosecutors often turn around and let them out on OR bonds.
You know what's crazy, Dr. Myers, is that I think the damage could be virtually permanent. And here's what I mean by that. In the same way that Joe Biden has contaminated the U.S. military by saying we're going to go with woke policies and all that, then you push out all the people who see it otherwise, who say, I don't want to be around for all this stuff, and they're the ones who quit. That means when and if you get to hire new young men and women to go to work, they're going to be learning from the people who are willing to tolerate the woke policies. The cops are wrong, the cops are racist, or they would at least tolerate it or go along and get along where the job was more important than saying, no, I don't buy any of that, I'm out of here. And those new young cops are not going to get the benefit of those people who've left unless you could somehow bring them back. And how long will it then take to turn things around if the new generation of cops are all learning from people who've adopted the political correctness that did the damage to begin with? No, let's not arrest, or we've got to arrest more people of certain demographics, because the cops are unfair to black Americans or brown Americans. I don't think it's true. I don't think that indictment is true, but I think that the people who stayed with those police departments may actually be willing to go along with that notion. And that's going to be damaging to the new cops who come on.
Exactly, Lars. As you know, police training is accredited, and there's curriculum that has to be approved at the state level most often. And like universities, a lot of the curriculum now is being interwoven into political correctness and equity and diversion, just like we see in colleges. A lot of the training programs are actually managed and with oversight by some of the public colleges and universities in the state. So we have, and I'm not against things that we can do in training is important. Like we should have more outcomes-based training for law enforcement so they have practical scenarios. But like the military is going through right now, we're having valuable amount of time and training that's spent towards equity and other types of courses that really are not necessary.
I mean, I used to go on ride-alongs with cops a lot, and I knew police officers who deliberately say, don't put me in the quiet district, put me in an active district, get me out there where I can do my job. They love doing the job. But an awful lot of cops, maybe the ones who stayed behind, say, no, put me in the quiet district. Or if I'm in the active district, cops can be very active on their job, or they can clock in, get behind the wheel, drive their route, go through their district, not make that many arrests. I mean, and there's a world of difference between one cop and the other. And that's what I worry about, is that we may be stuck with that other crowd of police officers who will say, well, I showed up, I put on the uniform, I did what I was required to do, but I didn't go beyond that. And I think that's a real disservice to their community. Dr. Myers, thanks very much. I appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
That is Dr. Curry Myers, who's a criminologist and a former sheriff and a former state trooper. Glad to be with you on a Monday. I'll get to your calls in a moment. Our Twitter poll today, should DACA illegal aliens be allowed to become police officers? I'd say no to that. You can vote any way you like. You'll find the question at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group, and you should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC's better for you and better for America. Coming up in just a moment, we'll get to your calls and our institutions trying to stop climate change, misinformation in and of themselves. We'll talk about that and one particular man coming up. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Monday. I'll get to your calls here in just a moment. I want to mention this, though. There's a Nobel laureate by the name of Dr. John Clauser. And he's known for his work in quantum mechanics, which has to do with things that go way beyond my understanding, although some of it is, it's called entanglement. And one of these days, I want to get a good guest on to talk about that. It's really amazing stuff where you could transmit information across infinite distances in zero time. So in other words, you get around the speed of light and all that. But this guy was scheduled to speak at the International Monetary Fund, and then he expressed some views on climate change that are more like mine, saying this climate change stuff is just nonsense. And all of a sudden, he gets canceled out. The CO2 Coalition announced following Clauser's remarks challenging climate change during a speech at a quantum theory conference in Korea this year. Nobel laureate John Clauser was to present a seminar on climate models to the IMF Thursday, and now his talk has been summarily canceled. I don't believe there's a climate crisis, he says. The world we live in today is filled with misinformation. It's up to each of you to serve as judges, distinguishing truth from falsehood based on accurate observation of phenomena. That sounds pretty sensible to me. In any case, one of the founders of the CO2 Coalition did not like what Dr. Clauser had to say, so they simply said, well, we'll cancel him out. That is not the way to respond to this. In any case, glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Let's go to Pam, who's calling in from Idaho, listening on KMAX. How are you doing, Pam? Or KXLY? How are you?
Good. Thanks, Lars. Hey, I'm calling to give you some good news. You were talking earlier with Tracy Beans, and you had wished somebody would open a new bank. And so I wanted to tell you about Old Glory Bank. Somebody did it. It is in Oklahoma. It was opened by John Rich. He's the country singer with Big and Rich. Yep. Larry Elder and Dr. Ben Carson.
And Larry's an old friend, and Dr. Ben Carson is somebody we've had on the show. Just so everybody else understands what we're talking about, Pam, we were talking about the fact that banks are now beginning to debank people, sometimes celebrities like Nigel Farage and others, and they're doing it apparently in response to try to silence those people by saying, oh, you want to talk about things that we don't agree with you on, then we're just going to tell you to move your money to a new bank. And for most of us, moving to a new bank is a complicated process, especially because of the way your life gets interconnected with automatic payments, with mortgages, with the whole nine yards. And I said, I've always been a free market guy, saying if some of the marketplace says we're going to cancel out your bank account simply because you're, we don't like your political point of view, I was wishing out loud that somebody with some money would start a bank or buy an existing bank and advertise it as a bank that was open to all. I wouldn't even say just conservatives. Just say, we don't care what your politics are. We're here to do your banking business for you, and we'll ignore that. But entities like Chase Bank have been doing otherwise, just so everybody else understands what you're referring to. So does Old Glory Bank meet that definition?
Yes, they do. And if you go to their website, it talks about it. So my understanding is they did this after what happened to the truckers in Canada. And so the first brick and mortar is in Oklahoma, but I have opened an account myself. It was easy, painless, and it works. Got my debit card. I am currently using it. And, yep, you can go to oldglorybank.com, and it talks about that they will not cancel your account for your political beliefs. And I trust all these guys, so I'm very happy. So when I heard you talking to Tracy, I wanted to give a shout-out to them and your listeners because it's definitely needed.
Well, and Pam, off their website, thanks to you, I just looked it up. I have to confess I wasn't aware of it, but it says, welcome to Old Glory Bank, the bank for the hardworking Americans who make this country run every day. You stand for love of country, faith, freedom of speech, respect for our flag, and a deep appreciation for our military, law enforcement, and first responders. So do we. Join us in Old Glory Nation. We stand with you no matter where you stand. I like that neutral point of view, to say, your politics are your politics, we'll take care of your money. And I think that's very honest. I hope they survive.
I think they will. I really think they will. And so I just, you don't hear good news very much anymore. So when you said you wish somebody would do that, I thought I am going to stay on the line until I can give you some good news. So
well, you're very kind to do it. You know what my concern is, Pam?
What?
Behind, and I don't expect me to be the expert on all this, but behind all those debit cards, I mean, the big four are Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and I think Discovery is the third or fourth one on the list, and Amex is one of those. But behind all those, there are companies that facilitate the movement of that money that don't have famous names on them. In fact, we talked about it a few weeks ago. And those guys can shut down a credit card. I mean, in other words, you can say, we're Visa, But if the folks behind that, who are not part of Visa, but they're part of a company that actually does the money transfers, if they decide to wage war on you, they can shut you down. And that's where I'd get concerned that an institution like Old Glory Bank might come under attack from those people saying, oh, well, we're just not going to provide you with service. Much the same way that some of the social media a couple of years ago were doing the right thing. They were saying we're open to all points of view. And all of a sudden, Amazon Web Services say, well, we're not going to provide you with web services anymore. And they basically punched a hole in some of those budding social media companies. And I worry the same thing could be done to an institution like Old Glory Bank. It's great that they're pushing this point of view because it's great.
Yes, yeah, I guess that can happen, but you know what? They got God behind them, and it's in the going in the right direction for sure. And I think it's something we should support.
I think it's fantastic. I'll tell you what, we'll reach out. I mean, Ben Carson's a friend of the show. I haven't talked to John Rich. I mean, I've seen him perform. And of course, Larry Elder's a good man as well. Maybe we can get one of them to come on and talk about this because that's a great idea. That's the marketplace, which tends to be more honest than politicians, because the marketplace says, we just want to do business with you. I've always wished that there were people who would simply do what it is if you're going to sell me tires, you don't care if I'm a Republican or a Democrat. You don't care if I'm conservative or liberal. Sell me some tires. And when these private institutions begin to start picking and choosing, saying, oh, we don't like that point of view, we don't want to do business with you. And behind them, you have the big companies like the BlackRocks and Vanguards that are starting to push ESG and DEI and all these other ideas. That's where we get in trouble because then you get in. And for the life of me, for all the dumb things that Target seems to have done, and I've got no dog in the fight there other than that occasionally I've gone to Target with my wife, but we won't go anymore because of the crazy stuff they've done. I don't know how much of that was the company itself making those decisions or whether it was these big money, private financial institutions like BlackRock and Vanguard and others pushing them to be DEI or pushing them to all these crazy woke policies. Because that's going to start happening as well. So, Pam, thanks for the heads up, and thanks for listening on KIDO. Sorry about that. I misidentified your affiliate station earlier, but it's KIDO, the home of Kevin Miller. Thanks for being with me on a Monday. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@LarsLarson.com. And here's a question for you to consider because we've talked about it before, but should the Republicans who control Pennsylvania's state Senate hold Governor Shapiro accountable for breaking his explicit campaign promise? Shapiro had said that he would back school choice. And then when push came to shove, he decided to cave in that case. So now the question is, will the Republicans in the Keystone State actually stand up and say, then you're going to pay the cost of doing otherwise and breaking your promise? Back in a moment, you're listening to the Lars Larson Show. So the governor of Pennsylvania made an explicit promise to back school choice. And then when push came to shove, he kind of folded up. Governor Shapiro gave up. The question is, what should the Republicans do? And why there is such a deep divide between red America and blue America on the subject of school choice, which seems really hard to argue against. I'm a fan of school choice. Phil Kerpen is as well, the president of American Commitment. Hey, Phil, welcome back to the program.
Hey, my pleasure, Lars.
I will admit that when I saw the promise by Shapiro, I thought he'll stick to that promise only until it gets tough, and then he'll cave in. Although there was a part of my heart said, I really hope that he follows through on this and says, this is perfect. This is good for our state, good for the kids, good for the parents, good for the taxpayers. But of course, at the last minute, he caved in. What should Republicans do in response?
Yeah, well, I congratulate you for your cynicism. I usually am pretty cynical myself, but I have to admit that after he campaigned on it and after he went on Fox News 6 or 8 weeks ago and he was still saying he was for it, and after he literally cut a deal with the Republican state Senate, which has a 10-seat Republican majority, and put it in the budget, I thought it was done. I thought it was going to happen. And of course, the Democrats have it's an equally split House, 100-100, but they've got the gavels, they've got the speakership and the chairmanship and so forth. But All he had to do was convince one House Democrat, one, and this would have passed. And instead he said, oh, I'm going to veto it because I just can't convince a single House Democrat, which is a completely absurd lie. I mean, there's just no way that a popular Democratic governor can't convince a single one of 100 state House Democrats. And so he had the facts of life explained to him by the union bosses, and they basically had to tell him, we don't care that you support this. We don't care that it's good policy and good politics. We're the money and the power of this party, and you'll fall into line. And he did. And I think that must have been what happened. And I think that, look, Republicans, in my judgment, in the Senate should not back down. They should see this fight through, even though it would mean a government shutdown and the money would stop flowing to various agencies. And, the way the media covers that is always crazy, and they always blame the Republicans. But honestly, in this particular circumstance, they're talking about, taking the fight to the mat potentially for scholarships for low-income kids who are stuck in failing schools. This was $100 million for poor kids in the worst 15% of school districts in the state by performance. If they can't win on that with the public, and they can't convince the governor that he's got to go ahead and keep his promise and deliver one Democratic vote, then, I mean, that's kind of pathetic. So I hope they see this fight through to the end.
Not just his popularity, but if you go to those Democrats who voted no on the idea that the worst kids in the worst schools.
Three of them, by the way, Lars, voted no after voting yes. Three of them voted no after voting yes. So,
wow.
Go figure.
So, but if you go to them and say, well, look, we're going to humiliate you because we're going to tell the public you're voting against the poorest kids in this state and their families, against giving them the choice, and they don't have to take the choice. They could say, I think I'll stick with the failing government schools and let them fail my kids as well. Is that really what you want to stand up for? I can't imagine that out of 100 Democrats, you couldn't find one who said, yeah, you're right, that's stupid. I'm not going to line up with my party on a stupid position. There wasn't one?
Not one in Pennsylvania, although, the Democrats are litmus testing this issue, which is disgusting. But frankly, we saw one Democrat in North Carolina break with her party and vote for school choice in North Carolina, and it runs out of the party. She's a Republican now. She's switched parties over it, Tricia Cotham. Down in Georgia, the one really outspoken Democrat on school choice in the state house, Mesha Mainor, was drummed out of the party. She switched parties. She's a Republican now. And so that's how serious about this the Democrats are. They will not tolerate support for scholarships for private schools for poor kids in failing schools, period. You're not allowed to do that as a Democrat, which tells you a lot, I think, about the power of the teachers' unions in that party.
I mean, because what it says, the assumption you have to make is that the Democrats are saying if people were ever given a choice to take their kids out, we will lose a tremendous number of them. Well, you're basically proving the point. You're saying that even the poorest kids with the poorest families can recognize what a failure the public schools are. And if you gave them a choice to go to school anywhere else, a private school, a charter school, or whatever, that they would immediately leave. That seems to be a pretty serious indictment of the public education system, doesn't it?
An enormous indictment. And of course, the other thing they're scared of is if you do a program for just the poorest kids in the worst performing schools, that it'll be popular and successful and it'll grow and eventually it'll be for all the kids in all the schools. Yeah, and I think that's good, but for them, they think that's like the apocalypse.
But see, Phil, the argument I've always made when people say, well, you'll wreck the public schools, I said, good. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, they've got two choices. Yeah. If you have new competition, if you're a public school that says we have all these kids because they have to go to school here, and now they have a choice, so they go somewhere else, the public schools have two very clear-cut choices. There may be more gradations of it, but two choices. One, compete with the private schools. Make your product better to get your customers not to leave. I went to high school in a town that had one hamburger stand. There was no McDonald's, there was no Burger King, there was no Wendy's. There was one local hamburger stand. And it would be like saying, well, if a second hamburger place came in, this place is going to go out of business. Only if they don't compete. And if they don't compete, they deserve to go out of business, is my point of view. And I understand the Democrats they say we have to be loyal. But when you're being loyal to people who admit our product is so bad, if given the choice, say the majority of our parents and kids would leave. Well, that doesn't say much about you. It's like running a restaurant where you're the worst place as a restaurant, but you're the only restaurant within 50 miles. So everybody who wants to go to a restaurant has to go to you, and you don't want them to have the choice not to because you realize your customers will all leave. Well, that's nothing to be proud about, is it?
No, of course not. And of course, many of these Democratic politicians went to private schools. Many of them send their own kids to private schools. So they're fine with private schools. They just want them to be the province only of people who can afford them while they're paying for the public school on their taxes as well. I do want to flag one really good news story. Nevada had a very small school choice program. It only covered about 1,500 kids, 1,500 to 2,000 very poor kids, got scholarships for private schools in Nevada. The governor wanted to expand that program, Republican governor wanted to expand that program from $7 million to $50 million. The Democratic-controlled legislature said, how about zero? They eliminated the program completely in the budget, put zero funding for it. All of these kids were going to be kicked out of the schools that they're currently in if a solution couldn't be found. And the governor brilliantly allocated COVID relief funds for scholarships so those kids can stay in their school. So I think it's the best use of COVID relief funds ever. But that was a good news story out of Nevada this week.
That is a great story. Phil, thanks for what you do at American Commitment. We really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Take care now. That's Phil Kerpen with us. Glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk at... Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I'd mentioned that Devin Archer, the former business partner of Hunter Biden, has now testified behind closed doors, but in an on-the-record interview with members of Congress. I want to find out, was Joe Biden involved in Hunter Biden's business dealings? And the answer we've always received from Joe Biden on the campaign trail and as president is that he has never been involved in, doesn't even speak about business with his remaining surviving son, who he calls the smartest guy he knows. So it's kind of surprised to get a naysayer, but I'm glad for it. Linda, we love naysayers on this program. We always put them first. We have for more than 26 years, and we'll continue to do it as long as I'm behind this mic. But with all this testimony, I'm kind of curious, what is it that we disagree about to make you a naysayer today? And welcome.
Okay, yeah, I understand that there's testimony that he talks to his son about business. Do we have any proof that he is in business or has been influenced? Or do we just have conjecture?
Well, I think we do. I think we have circumstantial proof. I mean, if you're saying, do we have a piece of paper that Joe Biden signed saying, I decided to do favors for Hunter Biden's, the people who are paying Hunter Biden millions, literally millions of dollars, and I did it because my son was involved in that. Do I have Joe signing that? No, I don't. But I'll tell you what, just to understand, because I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but I want you to ask anything you want to ask.
So
Go ahead.
Can you answer me? Is it conjecture on your part?
No.
No. Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you why.
If it's
I
not
know
conjecture,
for a documented fact that Hunter Biden received $4 million to sit on the board of directors of a company for which he has no background at all. It'd be like making me the Major League Baseball commissioner, and you'd say, "What is Lars?"
Is that proof?
No, I didn't. I was going to give you
that his father was involved.
Hold on, Linda. Let me give you the second. No, there's a second piece. The second piece, and I didn't quite get to that, is that while Hunter Biden was sitting on the board of directors, he'd only been on for a short time.
Yes, I know his father got the attorney general, but there are other reasons for the attorney general to go, other legitimate reasons.
Well, let me ask you something, Linda. Can you tell me the last time you can remember a president or a vice president of the United States trying to get a prosecutor in any other country fired?
I can't. And can you tell me?
And I can't either.
Okay, so if you're doing conjecture, what about Trump's son-in-law getting billions of dollars from the Saudis and Trump completely ignoring that the Saudis murdered a journalist? I guess that might have been worth millions of dollars. Or
actually, I don't think he ignored it. I think our country put pressure on the Saudis. Well, I'm going to tell you, my read of it is different. The other thing is, you're talking about Jared Kushner, who was in the real estate business for decades before he...
Yes.
Can I finish?
Yes.
Let me finish. Jared Kushner was in the real estate business for decades. Then, for a short period of time, a few years, he worked for his father-in-law, President Trump, for nothing in the White House and was in
for nothing. Boy, you're naive.
Well, he
worked
didn't get
for nothing,
paid.
and then he got
No, but-
$2 billion when he left. He
No,
worked
but
for
hold on,
nothing. Boy, are
Linda.
you naive?
Linda, can I
I
finish
cannot
this?
believe how naive you
Linda,
are.
I just like to finish because then I want people to hear.
Okay. It's great.
You're in the real estate business for years. You get investors to back up your real estate projects. That's what every person who's in development does, unless they happen to have a gigantic bank account. And even people with gigantic bank accounts raise money, right?
Right.
Okay. He was in that business for years. He works for his father-in-law for a couple of years at the White House without drawing a paycheck, and then he leaves. When he leaves that job, 6 months later, he's back in his old business again.
Yeah,
and
he worked for his father-in-law out of the goodness of his heart and because he's such a patriot. You are so naive.
Well, let me ask you
after he
something,
leaves,
Linda.
His father-in-law's employees gets billions
Linda,
of dollars from the Saudis.
Linda, do you understand that I make a good paycheck? Karine Jean-Pierre's
I'm sure you
paycheck
do.
is okay. Okay, I'm saying that because if President Trump were to say, Lars, can you come be my press secretary? I'd say, hey, that's a giant cut in pay. If you're Jared Kushner and you go from being a developer, and developers make a lot of money.
He did it out of the goodness of
You
his
don't
heart.
want to hear this, do
Such
you?
a
Because
patriot.
I can always
No, I
tell
don't
when
really.
you don't want to
He is
hear
very
it
naive.
because you know that it would beat your argument. When Kushner
very naive.
when Kushner took a couple of years to work at the White House and couldn't work on his private development projects, do you think that cost him money?
They kept on going then, and then he got billions of dollars when he left.
See, you're trying to skip
It didn't cost him any
skip
money,
the facts.
did it? 'Cause after it was done, he got billions of dollars from the Saudis.
He went back to
How
his
naive.
old business that he had. If he had never gone,
Mhm.
hold on,
And he
Linda.
immediately got-
Linda, you know what, Linda? I won't have that kind of conversation. Can you agree to have a conversation or not? Because I listen to you,
I can have
and
a
I want you to listen to me. If somebody's in a business like I'm in this business, if President Trump said, "Hey, come be my press secretary for a couple of years," I say, "Okay, it's a giant cut in pay, but I will do that for a couple of years for you." Should I be allowed to go back to my old business when I'm done working
sure.
for the?
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Oh, sure.
is that what Jared Kushner did?
No.
It's not.
Immediately
went-
after.
No,
he
not
left, he
immediately.
got $2
6
billion.
months.
So he wasn't
6
doing
months.
his business. In 6 months, he made billions from the Saudis by returning to his
No,
own business.
see, you've been reading the wrong websites. I know the facts on this
I
one.
see your
Linda,
websites are the right
no,
ones
I'm
because
just
they're right
okay. I'm
wing.
going to put Linda on hold because she doesn't know how to have a conversation. Here's what happened: Jared Kushner is making a ton of money as a developer. He agrees to go to work for Donald Trump, puts his own business on hold, works there for a couple of years without drawing a paycheck, leaves the White House, and goes back to his old business. 6 months after he left the White House, he convinces the Saudis, put $2 billion into my real estate development, which he had been doing before he went to the White House. Now, you have to ask yourself this. If Jared Kushner had said, "Hey, Pops," or whatever he calls Donald Trump, "I don't have time to go work at the White House. I've got a business to run. I'm just going to stay out here doing my business." There's no reason to believe that he wouldn't have raised the same kind of money from private investors because that's what he had been doing for decades. Now, Linda, what I'm suggesting is the people in Ukraine who wanted that prosecutor fired, they couldn't get rid of him in Ukraine. So they said, we need a way to put pressure on the government of Ukraine. And that's what Joe Biden supplied, because millions of dollars were paid to Hunter Biden by people who, if they'd been able to get the prosecutor fired on their own in Ukraine, would not have paid millions of dollars to Hunter Biden. By paying millions to Hunter Biden, Hunter tells Daddy, Daddy tells the Ukrainians, you either fire that prosecutor or I'm withholding $1 billion in taxpayer assistance to Ukraine. This is back when Joe was vice president. So how did they get Joe Biden to jump on their side? They paid millions of dollars to his son. You're trying to make the case, and I hear what you're trying to do, but you're skipping the facts. If Jared Kushner had never gone to work at the White House, he had, over the years, got people to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in his real estate developments. Now, if you're suggesting that the Saudis only invested with Jared Kushner because he used to work free of charge for his father-in-law, I don't think so. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your phone calls and emails, and we'll do that in just a moment. I'm one of those people who very much agrees with what's called the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment says You don't spend one thin dime of federal taxpayer money on abortion. And then the Joe Biden administration has been so pro-abortion. They always call it women's reproductive health care because apparently they can't even stand saying the A word themselves, so they use a euphemism for it instead. They're so pro-abortion that they want the Pentagon to take money and tell service members who become pregnant and want to seek an abortion and can't get one because they waited too long in the state in which they're stationed, that they should give these service members up to 3 weeks time off from their military service and travel expenses and the cost of the abortion as well. A lot of us find that absolutely outrageous and unbelievable, and there have been efforts to try and stop it. I thought we'd talk about it with Adam Schwen, who's the Western Regional Director of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group. Adam, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here, Lars.
I guess I should say I have a dog in the fight because I went to high school with Adam's dad, but we ran into each other through this issue and not through that connection. But Adam, my best to your dad. But tell me this: where do we stand right now with the efforts to try and block the Biden administration from using the Pentagon and tax dollars that are supposed to go to the defense of America to kill babies instead?
Well, the Republicans in the House have taken a stand. They said that we're drawing a line here. Our military should be focused on winning wars and deterring them, not on becoming the biggest abortion tourism organization in the country. So the National Defense Authorization Act, which is our budget that tells the Defense Department how much money they have to spend, there was an amendment added on by a couple of our pro-life legislators, pro-life Republicans, saying that you need to follow the law, Joe Biden. You need to follow the law. And that fortunately passed along with the rest of the act, headed on over to the Senate. It came with the vote of Lori Chavez DeRemer, which we are very happy and very thankful that she made the right vote there. And the Senate did their own vote. It has a distinctly less controversial. They did not, unfortunately, take the same stand. So that's heading off into a conference committee. The two houses will get together, and hopefully at the end of the day, we will have a military budget that is focused on winning wars and deterring them, not on killing babies.
And ultimately protecting American lives. Now, what's the likelihood that when they get to the horse trading that goes on when they try to settle out the differences in the bills, Senate bill and House bill, that they'll end up throwing the Ronnie Jackson bill under the bus?
Well, I don't want to say that they're definitely going to do that. I'm not going to say that they're definitely not going to do that. But what I will say is, if it gets to Joe Biden's desk, there's a pretty darn low chance he's actually going to sign it. But what this really is about is Republicans coming together and saying that this is not our military should not be breaking the law and funding abortions. And Lars, you mentioned for military members. It's not just military members; it's also their family members.
Their family members too.
Right now, there's about 20 abortions that are funded. About 20 abortions that are funded because of life of the mother situations in other states by the government. That would go up to 4,000 by the government's own question, by government's own facts. That's a 20,000% increase. So
that's crazy.
No matter what happens, we're proud of our Republican pro-life members of Congress who are standing up against the Biden administration's illegal activities.
Well, let me ask you this, because I get this question all the time, Adam, from listeners who say, well, if it's illegal to spend federal dollars on abortion, how can the Pentagon get away with doing it? I mean, is there a sensible answer to that?
No, there's not. And that's one of the giant frustrations that we have here. We have never seen an administration so incredibly militantly pro-abortion. This is not the safe, legal, and rare crowd of the 1990s that we remember. These folks are so militantly pro-abortion. These folks aren't pro-choice. They are pro-abortion, because if they were really, quote-unquote, pro-choice, they would be trying to give these service men and women all the services that they need to make the decision to choose life. But they're not doing that. The ultimate choice that they want these men and women to make is have an abortion. have an abortion. Have an abortion. It's the quickest, easiest thing. It makes it so they don't have to provide the services for their members. It can just get them right back on the field, and that's really a shame. And it's really not what we owe our service members who have fought so bravely to protect this country.
Well, and Adam, one of the other points I've heard made by other folks about this, and I thought it was a good one, is that the military is not necessarily family friendly. Now, I understand you'll probably hear from vets who say, our job isn't to be military friendly, our job is to protect America and win wars. I understand that. But if the military is now proposing, hey, you want to get an abortion, we'll be glad to do it. What if they could actually say, hey, if you decide to have the child, we'll give you some help in that regard as well, rather than do the alternative. The military, I guess, based on what some current serving members have told me, is not terribly family friendly. And they could be, couldn't they?
Well, I think they certainly could be. And this goes with society as a whole. We need to change the whole mindset of the quickest, easiest thing when you have an unplanned pregnancy is to just have an abortion. Why aren't we going to these women and saying, here's all the opportunities that you have to choose life. Here are all the services that are provided. Here's the Pregnancy Resource Center that's just available right on base that'll get you all the services that you need. Instead, we have people like Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren going out there and bad-mouthing all of these awesome pro-life clinics that are pro-life health organizations who are just wanting to help women who are doing the work. And instead, no, we just need to make sure that these women get abortions. These people are not pro-choice. If they were really pro-choice, they would give the whole gamut of choices. And people like Joe Biden and his administration, unfortunately, just aren't interested in doing that.
And by the way, just so you know who pushed all this, it was Representative Ronnie Jackson. He's a Republican from Amarillo, Texas, and Chip Roy from Austin, and 70 other Republican co-sponsors. Did you get a single one of the Democrats to sign on board with this?
No. But I will say that I believe Representative Cuellar from Texas, the one pro-life Democrat that exists in Congress still, was supportive. So we thank him for that. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party, we used to have so many pro-life Democrats. That used to not be an oxymoron. It used to be a pretty common thing. And this was just, a generation or two ago. We're not talking about 40, 50 years ago.
No.
Unfortunately, the party has become so militantly pro-abortion. It isn't enough to say, well, I'm pro-choice. You have to be pro-abortion up to birth, and you need to allow taxpayers to pay for it. That's the only acceptable option for these folks.
I mean, it's worth remembering that Vice President Al Gore was pro-life from Tennessee as a senator. And the minute he got into the presidential sweepstakes, he ditched his pro-life credentials altogether. But there's a infamous letter that he wrote, where he wrote back to people in Tennessee saying, you can count on me. I'm always going to be pro-life. I always have been, and I always will be. And, of course, that was probably not worth the paper it was printed on. That's Adam Schwend. Adam, thank you very much. My best to your dad. Adam Schwend is the Western Regional Director of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group. And it sounds like this bill might actually go to Joe Biden's desk, the National Defense Authorization. And if Joe Biden then vetoes it because he supports abortion so much, well, that'll be an entirely interesting message to send to the American people. Pleasure to be with you. And if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's easy. 866-HEY-LARS. And naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. You can vote in our Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show, or you can go to my website. The vote counts the same at larslarson.com. And you can send an email to talk@larslarson.com. Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. Well, Joe Biden is now cracking down on gasoline-powered cars, and I think this is not just inconvenient. It's not just messy. It's not just expensive, but I'm going to make the argument that it's literally deadly. And I'll see if Mike Summers agrees with me. Mike is the president and the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Mike, welcome back.
Lars, great to be with you.
I can't even remember how long ago I learned the definition of CAFE, which is an acronym for Corporate Average Fuel Economy. It's a little Well, it's kind of in the weeds a little bit, but it means in essence, if I were running a car company like Ford or General Motors, if my CAFE requirement is that my average fuel economy has to be whatever it has, 26.4 miles per gallon for 2022, that means if I want to make a bunch of, say, pickup trucks that get 19 miles to the gallon, I got to make a bunch of, Ford Escorts that get 35 or 40 miles a gallon so that the average for all of my cars comes out to 26.4. Do I understand that right?
That is exactly right. You know exactly what you're talking about, Lars.
Well, for a change, every once in a while, even a broken alarm clock's right twice a day. So what is the Biden administration going to do? They say we want to boost fuel economy for pickup trucks and work vans by 10% every single year starting in 2030, and they want to boost passenger cars and light trucks by 2 to 4% every year. What's that going to do?
Well, basically, it's going to accelerate what's happening right now, which is car companies are going to be producing more electric vehicles that Americans don't want, that are going to sit on car lots longer. And the truth of the matter is, what these regulations are putting into place right now in the United States, and through another proposal that was put out by the EPA earlier this year, they're essentially saying that by 2030, that our fleet that is sold in the United States is going to be over 60% going to have to be EV, and that's not what Americans want right now.
Well,
we're not opposed to electric vehicles, but this is something that Americans have to demand, and they need the choice between a traditional engine, like an internal combustion engine, or an electric vehicle. But that choice shouldn't be forced on them by the federal government.
Okay, so Mike, back me up or feel free to refute what I'm saying. The second effect it's going to have is if they say, well, we're going to put 60% electrics on the lot, and we're going to diminish, even though right now they have a vast oversupply of electrics that aren't moving off car lots. Am I right about that?
That is correct. On average, an EV stays on a car lot almost twice as long as a conventional vehicle.
So in other words, when they said, oh, people would buy these things if only we had enough to sell, now they've got enough to sell, and it turns out not that many people want to buy them. But I think there's a second part of the game, and you tell me if it works out this way. If I take any product in existence or service in existence and I make a smaller supply of it, like De Beers did with diamonds for decades, where you say we're going to artificially choke down the supply, then you boost the price, not the value, but the price. So if all the car companies say we're going to put 60% non-selling electrics on the lot, and that means only 40% gas cars, since there will be fewer gas cars, but people presumably still want to buy them, the price of those cars is going to go up dramatically, right?
Well, I think what you're already seeing, particularly with electric vehicles, and you are correct in predictions about what the future means for ICE vehicles, is that consumers are going to be paying more for their vehicle. What does that actually mean, though? The reason why they're putting forward these proposals is because they're trying to meet some new environmental standard. The truth of the matter is what this is going to do is that this is going to keep cars that are on the road today on the road longer. Yep. And that actually, because you're not upgrading your vehicle, that is actually long-term bad for the environment. And that's what your listeners should be concerned about, is they're going to want to keep their car because they don't want to buy the car that's on the car lot. And those cars are going to be less efficient than cars that are produced in the future. And I think everybody should be concerned about, the average car right now stays on the road for about 14 years. So It's going to take a long time for this fleet to turn over. That's not good for the environment. We need continual improvement in those cars to turn over. And the more you increase those prices, the less likely it's going to be that American consumers are going to upgrade their vehicle.
In fact, if you were to take everybody out there who's driving a 13-year-old car and convince them somehow to buy a brand new car, that car is already dramatically cleaner than the 13-year-old car, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. But I think the concern is with an electric vehicle in particular, there are huge concerns about, first of all, we're not judging that vehicle based on where the products were mined or from a national security perspective at all. The only place that we're judging the emissions of that vehicle are through its tailpipe. And that is not the right way to judge the emissions of an electric vehicle. We should be starting from the place that vehicle is mined for the lithium and the nickel and the aluminum and all the products that it needs to make that engine to the full life cycle. And what we're seeing right now is that most Americans are not getting to the amount of miles where an EV is actually environmentally beneficial. It takes till about 60,000 miles for an EV to be environmentally more sound than a traditional electric internal combustion engine. And so the concern that everybody should have right now, Lars, is, this doesn't even make environmental sense. It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make pocketbook sense. And it certainly doesn't even make environmental sense.
Well, the other thing I'm concerned about, Mike, and this is where I said it could literally be deadly for Americans, is I remember reading studies 20 years ago where they said the cheapest, quickest way to increase the fuel economy of a car is cut its weight. And they said, but the problem is if you start with a car that's already light and you say, okay, I'm going to trim a couple 100 pounds off of it, statistically, you make the people who drive that car statistically more likely to die if there's ever a car crash. Now, nobody tries to get in a car wreck, but if you have a car wreck, your car gets hit by another car or hits another car, and it weighs 100 pounds or 200 pounds or 300 pounds less, the people inside are more likely to get either badly hurt or die, aren't they?
That's right. That should be a huge concern, and not only from a public safety perspective, but also they do increasingly significant damage on American roadways. So this is going to mean much higher infrastructure costs as we're building new roads that are going to have to be retrofitted to meet the new weight demands of an electric vehicle or an electric truck.
Would you mind, Mike, tell my audience how much more? Because I think they may think of the ICE car versus the electric car as roughly equivalent. There's a big difference in weight, isn't there?
There is a huge difference, particularly in an all-electric vehicle. If the Environmental Protection Agency wanted to do everything they could to advance environmental technology, what they'd be pushing car makers to build would be a traditional hybrid vehicle. And instead, they're skipping a step, and they're saying, we want you in an electric vehicle right now. That uses a heck of a lot more rare earth materials like lithium, which is not produced here in the United States. It's mainly produced in China. And if it's not produced in China, it's refined in China. So we're going to sacrifice American energy independence here that we have in the United States with gas that is produced here in the United States and ship it all back to China where these products and make us dependent on China for these critical minerals. So you're looking at significant weight increases that are going to significantly harm American people. This is bad for our national security. And by the way, it's not good for the environment either.
And weight in the battery, but not weight in the protective cage that's around somebody driving in a car, which is where the trimming of the weight actually causes problems. The other problem is you still have to make the electricity, and an amazing amount of American electricity is still made with fossil fuels, and I'm sure they ignore that as well. They're not going to take into account, well, to make that electric car go down the road, we got to make sure that there's enough electricity, and if it's coming from coal, as it still does, and it's coming from natural gas, and it still does, then we're going to have, well, we got to count that as a tailpipe emission. That is more local. That's Mike Summers, the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Back in a moment. We'll get to your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.
Do you think it was wrong for him to take that position, knowing that it was really because that company wanted access to you?
Well, that's not true. You're saying things you do not know what you're talking about. No one said that. Who said that?
Don't you think that it's just one of those things where people think, well, that seems kind of sleazy. Why would he have that job if not for who his father was?
Because he's a very bright guy.
I guess the question I'm kind of asking is, was it right?
His appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he said he regretted having done it.
He regretted having done it. I got to tell you something. That's Joe Biden talking to the Today Show some time ago about the question of Hunter Biden, which is now a question that's being considered not just in federal court, at the DOJ, and also at the White House right now. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Glad to be with you, and always glad to take your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. So Hunter Biden's business partner, Devin Archer, former business partner, because that business partner, Mr. Archer, is headed off to federal prison at some point. But he testified to a congressional committee behind closed doors in a transcribed interview. And there are a number of takeaways from this. And I wanted you to hear that from Joe Biden first, because what the reporter was asking him, and she was kind of couching it as, well, I'm kind of trying to ask you this about that. The fact is, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, had no expertise in natural gas, had no expertise in Ukraine. He was a lawyer, but he had just been dismissed from the United States Naval Reserve after 1 day in the U.S. Naval Reserve because he turned up positive on a cocaine test. So he wasn't exactly the kind of lawyer that most people would want to hire for any reason. So what did Burisma, the natural gas company, do? They put him on the payroll as a member of the board of directors at more than $80,000 a month, more than $1 million every year. And you wonder, well, what exactly were they buying? And is it right when we suspect that they were buying influence with Joe Biden? Well, guess what? Devin Archer did his testimony today, and excerpts of that testimony have already been made public from the GOP Oversight Committee. Devin Archer testified that the value of adding Hunter Biden to the board of directors of Burisma, the big Ukrainian natural gas company, was, quote, the brand. And he confirmed that then Vice President Joe Biden was the brand, and that 20 phone calls made by Joe Biden to people involved in Hunter Biden's business with Burisma were to sell the brand. Archer also confirmed that Joe Biden was referred to as my guy by Hunter Biden because in a number of the communications he made, well, I'll have to talk to my guy. And then in December, about 8 years ago, Mykola Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma, a big Ukrainian oligarch, got a lot of money, billionaire, and Vadim Pozharsky, an executive of Burisma, placed pressure on Hunter Biden to get help from Washington, D.C. regarding the Ukrainian prosecutor, Viktor Shokin. Shokin was investigating Burisma for corruption, but guess what? Joe Biden got Shokin fired. And he not only got him fired, he bragged about it. He bragged about it in a now infamous piece of video. We've played the audio of it on the air, in which Joe Biden said, I told those people in Ukraine, you get rid of that prosecutor, Mr. Shokin. And if you don't do it in the next 6 hours, I'm going to withhold $1 billion in foreign aid that had been promised by the then Obama administration. In fact, let's take a listen to that soundbite. I want you to hear exactly what Joe Biden said. Take a listen.
I said, I'm not going to, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said, I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Solid at the time. In other words, somebody who wasn't going to be investigating Burisma. So what have we got as a connection? I got a call from a young lady who said, Lars, you don't have anything but conjecture. Well, I ask people, have you ever heard of an American president or vice president pressuring any other country on planet Earth to get rid of a particular prosecutor or district attorney or attorney general? And the answer is no, because we view those as the business of that country. In this case, Joe Biden had been made the point person on Ukraine policy for the Obama administration. And right after that happened, I mean almost immediately after that happened, Burisma added Hunter Biden to its board of directors at the legendary $1 million a year. And I want to put that in context for you. Right after this story broke, and it's been out there now for years, literally, I asked some friends of mine who work in financial services and all, I said, how much do you get paid in America to be on a board of directors? I said, say it's a name brand board of directors, a big deal name that everybody knows. They said, oh, you $200,000 a year, maybe $250,000 a year. Well, this is 8 years ago in 2015. And Hunter Biden, who doesn't know how to speak Ukrainian, doesn't have any expertise in the energy field in general or natural gas in particular, is getting $1 million a year for what? Well, as Devin Archer testified today, for the brand. meaning for contact with Joe Biden. And then you can call it a coincidence if you want to, but Joe Biden ends up pressuring the Ukrainians by threatening to withhold $1 billion in American aid to Ukraine. This is long before the war in Ukraine, and says you either get rid of that prosecutor or you don't get the $1 billion. And he was trying to sound tough and act like he had a tough, demeanor when it came to this kind of thing. Now, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, according to the testimony today, he joined Hunter Biden's dinners with his foreign business associates in person or by speakerphone 20 different times. Now, why is that important? I want to play a mashup of sound bites over the last couple of years in which Joe Biden says, I didn't talk about business with my son. I didn't even talk about his business. And then we find out he's on 20 different occasions, either joining the dinner in person or speaking to the dinner with Hunter Biden's business associates over 20 times. But listen to what Joe Biden has told the American people over the years.
Listen, can we get together?
I don't discuss business with my son. I did my job. I never discussed a single thing with my son about anything having to do with Ukraine. He's done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him.
Nothing wrong.
I'm confident. My son did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. Never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters. Never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings. And because I don't discuss things with my son or my family, you know there's not one single bit of evidence.
Now, all of that puts the lie to what Joe Biden claimed. And what's the significance of it? Is there a reason that Americans are seeing tens of billions of dollars of their money being shipped off to Ukraine when the Biden crime family has made millions of dollars peddling Joe Biden's influence through Hunter Biden in countries like Ukraine, in Russia, and in China? You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.